Is for all of us today, which is the jobs numbers for last month, which people are just baffled by, frankly, because the top line number was way below what people expected. At the same time, participant rate is up, and unemployment rate is down.
Right.
What do you make of what it tells us about the economy?
So, I haven't had a chance to do a very deep dive, but the research that I've done so far, what I've seen, it seems to suggest to me that we shouldn't put too much stock in any one number. First of all, you like to look at this over time. Last month was an amazing number. It's also diverges from the household survey, and usually they end up converging. So I expect, I'm not sure that this gets revised up, but just over time, this is going to get reversed. Bottom line, I think the labor market is extremely strong. We're creating tremendous number of jobs. As you know, there are more job openings than there are people looking for jobs. Wages are growing, and at a pretty rapid pace, although not quite keeping up with inflation because inflation is so high. But I look forward to a deeper dive, but I think this is nothing to be terribly concerned about.
So inflation, you raised it, and you've had some discussions with the Fed Chair Jay Powell in those hearings this week. We all watched it as you asked questions about this. Where do you think we are with inflation? Do you think that Jay Powell gets it now?
So I think we're behind the curve. I think the Fed's behind the curve, and I was concerned from the beginning when they established this new paradigm of suggesting that 2% shouldn't be the ceiling for inflation. It should be the average. And furthermore, they would let inflation run above that for some indeterminate period of time. And then they decided that the inflation we started to see was transitory. So if you think about that, this is a recipe for getting behind the curve. If you're going to let it run hot and you're going to decide it's just transitory, well, how far do you let that go? And we all know once inflation gets too much of a head of steam, it becomes very hard to capture back. So I think they're behind the curve, but I do think if you listen to the chairman's comments, even prior to this week, but especially at our hearing, I think it's clear that they realize these numbers, inflation numbers, are coming in much hotter than they had expected, well above their own projections, and I think they feel the need to do something. So you heard him, as well as a number of his colleagues, talk about accelerating the taper and moving to normalizing rates more quickly.
So let's listen to just a little bit of your exchange with Chair Powell on this question of transitory. As you say, you asked him about that very specifically and what he had to say. This is what he said earlier this week.
The word transitory has different meanings to different people. I think it's probably a good time to retire that word and try to explain more clearly what we mean.
So what he was saying there is retiring the word transitory.
Yes.
You got him to do that. At the same time, he said he does think that by the middle of next year, the inflation will come back down toward that 2% number. Do you agree with him?
So the way I think about this is there is almost certainly a component of the inflation is the supply problems we've had, the surge in demand that accompanied coming out of the lockdowns. Some of that is just moving purchases forward, and so that will diminish some of the demand in the, over the course of the next 6 to 12 months probably. Inventories are building up. So for those kind of dynamics, I think that takes some of the inflation out, but I don't think we can dismiss a 30% increase in money supply last year, the ongoing hundreds of billions of dollars of purchases where the Fed just keeps injecting cash. So I think there is an underlying, and now of course we're seeing it show up in increasing wages, which famously leads to the danger of a wage price spiral. So my guess is part of this comes out as supply bottlenecks and demand sort of levels off, but part of it is a problem, and they need to normalize.
Besides the testimony we heard this week on Capitol Hill, we also spent a lot of time talking about Omicron, something we didn't even know about a week ago just today. And it's too soon, as I understand it, to know. Scientists don't know exactly what the ramifications would be. But what implications could it have for those supply chain issues you're suggesting? Some people are saying it may make it worse.
That's the concern. I mean, I certainly hope not, because I agree that there's more that we don't know than what we do know, but what we do know seems to suggest this is not particularly virulent. It may be readily transmissible, but it doesn't appear to lead to more likely adverse health outcomes. In addition to, I think, the reasonable expectation that vaccines work at least reasonably well, we're going to have therapies available soon that, again, what I've read so far suggests they're very likely to work against this variant. So what I'm getting to is I think there's reason to believe that it's not going to be wise to have lockdowns and shutdowns, and therefore I think we don't have to have an exacerbation in our supply chains. But not everyone might, everyone might not see it that way, so we'll have to see what happens.
One of the things that people are disagreeing about, specifically up on Capitol Hill, is about vaccination requirements that the president has imposed now, both on federal employees and on contractors. Do you think the Omicron makes it more understandable why you would require vaccines?
Oh, I understand why they want to do it, and I think that the federal government probably has the authority with respect to federal employees. But I really don't think the federal government has the constitutional or legal authority to impose a vaccine mandate on private sector employees and employers. As you know very well, our constitutional system does not give general policing powers to the federal government. Those are reserved to the states. And I think it's a bad idea. I think we're making a lot of progress on vaccinations, not as fast as I like. I'm in favor of being vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. My wife, my kids, we're all vaccinated. I encourage everyone to be vaccinated, but I'm not comfortable with the government forcing it on people, and I don't think the federal government even has the legal or constitutional authority to do it.
Senator, there was some discussion about the authority of the Federal Reserve Chair, actually, to have direct effect on regulation, because we now have a vice chair position open, responsible for supervisory responsibilities for the banks. Where are you on that? What sort of person do we need there, and what authority should that, and it is statutorily created, this vice chair position, have over regulation of the banks?
Well, so what we need is a clone of Randy Quarles. He's been terrific. We couldn't have a better, vice chair for supervision, but he's leaving, as you know. I hope we're going to have someone who's going to, respect the limited role they should play, the focus on actual supervision. By statute, it's the Federal Reserve that has regulatory authority over bank holding companies, so they need to exercise that authority, but they need to do it prudently and thoughtfully. So I'll be looking forward to seeing who that nominee is and really grilling that person about what their intentions are.
Is there likely to be more of a dispute over that along partisan lines than there was over Jay Powell? Because I heard a lot of Republicans complimenting Chair Powell, as well as Democrats.
Yeah, I think Chairman Powell is going to have broad bipartisan support. There'll be some dissent on both sides, but I think he'll be reconfirmed by a pretty big margin. And that may not be the case with the nominee to be the vice chair for supervision. It depends on whom they nominate. If you look, some of the nominations have been pretty radical in other areas of financial regulation. For instance, the president nominated to be the comptroller of the currency, which is the top banking regulator for national banks, nominated Saleh Omarova, who really has advocated socializing huge segments of financial services, a very, very outside of the mainstream set of pretty radical views. And that, if they go down the road of someone like that, then there's going to be tremendous pushback.
What's going to happen with the Professor Omarova nomination?
To be determined. If you saw the confirmation hearing, you heard Democrat senators expressing serious reservations. I'm quite confident there would be no Republican support for her confirmation, and it would take only one Democratic senator to cause her nomination to fail. So we don't know yet, but I'm hopeful that the White House will reconsider and come up with another nominee.
You've decided you don't want to serve another term. You're going to step down. You've paid your dues, and you're going to step down.
Yeah.
And some people are getting interested in that seat, it turns out. Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, has decided he's interested. There are reports that Dave McCormick of Bridgewater has said now he's going to decide within the next few weeks whether he runs as well, somebody who has served in the government before. Do you have any sense about who it should be, if it's a Republican?
No, I haven't taken sides in this. We also have candidates who have been in the race for a while, Carla Sands and Jeff Bartos, for instance. Look, I think the way this is shaping up is that Republicans have an embarrassment of riches. We have some terrifically qualified, enormously capable, very impressive people, and that probably leads to a really robust primary, and I have no idea how that turns out at this point, but I'm pretty confident. I'm feeling pretty good about the prospects that whoever emerges from this competitive primary, what I expect to be a competitive primary, will be a really good general election candidate and will hold the seat.
And what will that take in Pennsylvania? Because Pennsylvania is, I don't think of it as a blue state or a red state particularly. It could be up for grabs. What would it take to have a Republican prevail rather than a Democrat?
So I think what it is going to take, certainly you've got to appeal to suburban voters. Those are the swing voters, right? In the core of our cities, the Democrats are going to do well. In the rural areas, Republicans are going to do well. And the suburbs are the swing vote. So you have to have a message that appeals to suburban voters. And I think it's very, like the environment we're in right now, there is a very, very widespread backlash against what I think is a tremendous overreach on the part of this administration and the Democrats in Congress. So I think suburban voters are very receptive to a Republican message. Someone who can appeal to them is going to win Pennsylvania.
Senator, it's really great to have you here with us in New York. I hope you have a good holiday.
Thanks for having me.
Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania.